Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is pretty simple. We take a whole stack of news, research notes, and boil it down to what you really need to know.
Exactly. We filter out the noise for you.
Today, we're diving into a batch of news straight from 7 News Belize, dated Friday, June 20, 2025. Think of it as your shortcut to understanding what's really happening in Belize right now.
Yeah, we're going beyond just the headlines. We want to connect the dots for you, look at the different angles, and explore what these daily events actually mean for the country.
From the really personal stories right up to the big economic policies.
That's the goal, helping you see that bigger picture.
Okay, let's get into it then, because what immediately jumps out from these sources is the impact of a sudden tragedy, a very human story.
Yeah.
We have to start with the really heartbreaking news about 16-year-old Tyrel Cardines. He was killed on Thursday, June 19th in Hattieville, struck by a Floralia bus.
Just 16. It's incredibly shocking when someone that young is lost. His community, his classmates at Gwen Lizarraga High School, they must be reeling.
Absolutely.
And the personal side of this is just immense. His mother, Marilee Cardines, she described him as being just full of love, always ready with hugs and kisses.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It really is.
Yeah.
And he wanted to open his own business. He'd studied business. It's just so much potential lost.
His classmates, his homeroom class, they actually got together and gave a gift and some notes to his mother.
Wow. That really shows the kind of impact he had.
Yeah. In the aftermath, the bus was impounded. The driver, Jordi Salazar, who's only 20 himself, was issued with a notice of intended prosecution.
So basically a formal warning that charges are likely coming.
Right. And this awful event, it obviously goes beyond the family's grief. It really does raise these urgent questions about, public safety accountability on the roads there.
A tragic reminder.
So, from that immediate human impact, let's shift gears a bit. We're looking now at another aspect of daily life that touches everyone: government spending.
Ah, yes, the office rentals debate.
Exactly. We've got reports showing this is sparking some pretty heated discussion. PSU President Dean Flowers has been quite outspoken.
He's pointing to what he calls high-priced office rentals as government waste, essentially.
And the figures are quite specific, aren't they?
They really are. The Ministry of Blue Economy, for instance. Reports say they're renting one building for $14,000 a month.
$14,000?
And another one for $10,000 a month.
Wow.
And then you have the Ministry of Health and Wellness, reportedly the second highest, paying over $18,000 monthly for their rentals.
Okay, so that definitely highlights this tension you mentioned. The unions calling for accountability versus the ministries justifying these costs.
Precisely. And the ministers have pushed back.
Right. Andre Perez, the Minister of Blue Economy, he defended the figures, called them reasonable, said the ministry is new, it's expanding.
He also dismissed any talk of kickbacks, called it ludicrous and hogwash, said they follow public service guidance.
And he pointed out their office on Seashore Drive is, well, by the sea, fits the ministry's theme, he said. And they adopted the park out front. Apparently it beautifies the area, attracts tourists.
And the Minister of Health.
Their explanation for the $18,000 plus total was that the Central Health Region had to move because its building was condemned.
What?
So they detailed it. $11,000 paid to H.D. Thompson for 3 floors and $7,000 for 2 other floors at the current spot on Coney Drive.
So they provide reasons: expansion, relocation.
But the core question remains, right, how does this land with the average Belizean seeing these figures? Does reasonable cut it when people perceive waste?
That's the key political dynamic, isn't it? Even if the explanations are logical on paper, public perception, especially when finances feel tight, can be very different. Those kickback claims, even if dismissed, tend to linger in the air.
Yeah, good point. Okay, staying with public funds and accountability, let's turn to the Belize Defense Force. There's this situation with soldiers' salaries.
Right, this administrative error. Apparently it led to overpayments for some soldiers, stretching from 2019 right up to this year, 2025.
And the fix involves applying the correct 2019 pay scales retroactively.
Which means, yes, some soldiers will see a reduction in their upcoming paychecks.
But crucially,
they won't have to pay back the money they were overpaid. That's the compromise the Ministry of Finance authorized.
Okay, so it highlights issues with, long-term admin accuracy.
Definitely, and financial management.
And the Ministry of National Defense, they were quick to clarify this is a salary correction, not a pay cut across the board. It didn't affect everyone.
And there's another important piece here. 2 new allowances were approved for BDF soldiers.
Ah, right. the jungle and maritime allowance and the bush allowance?
Exactly. And those are being paid retroactively, too, from May 1st, 2024, starting with the July 2025 salary.
So that definitely adds some important context. It offsets the correction for some, potentially. It's not just about less take-home pay.
It adds significant nuance, yes.
Okay, another instance of public funds getting attention. Security contracts at the Belize Airports Authority, the BAA.
This one sounds messy. Reports called the contracts unlawful and said they left a lot to be desired.
And they were canceled. But apparently, with no disclosure about how much money was actually paid out, hundreds of thousands, reportedly, or what value was received.
Yeah, that lack of transparency is concerning. Senior Minister Francis Fonseca commented on it.
What did he say?
He said he wasn't really aware of all the specifics, but he thought canceling them was good because, and this is a quote, people involved felt that they were not properly done and properly executed.
So, an admission that something wasn't right, but not much detail.
Pretty much. It really underscores the ongoing challenge of ensuring proper execution and transparency in public procurement, doesn't it? How easily funds can disappear without clear oversight.
Absolutely, a critical lesson indeed. Okay, let's pivot slightly from procurement to political integrity itself. There's a fascinating legal development regarding political party names.
Oh, this is interesting. It stems from some infighting within the UDP, the United Democratic Party.
Right. Reports emerged that one faction was actually trying to trademark the party's name.
Which is pretty bold.
Yeah.
But what's really striking is how fast the government responded legislatively.
A new statutory instrument.
Exactly. From the Attorney General's Ministry and Billy Poe, the Belize Intellectual Property Office, it basically slams the door shut on that kind of move.
How so?
It closes a loophole. Before, a private entity could theoretically register a party's name or symbols. Now, the SI defines a political party's symbol very clearly.
Okay.
It includes any insignia, emblem, flag, seal, logo, design, or name that's been used for at least 10 years and is associated with the party that's actually run candidates in elections.
So it locks it down to established, recognized parties.
Precisely. It prevents someone from hijacking a party's identity, essentially.
So beyond just settling this UDP issue, what's the bigger picture here for Belizean politics?
Well, it's clearly about safeguarding the country's political heritage. Preventing voter confusion. It ensures the party's identity stays with the party itself, strengthening that core democratic process. It's quite a proactive measure.
Interesting. Okay, so we've looked at accountability, political integrity.
Yeah.
Let's shift now to the economic engine of Belize. The sources paint a picture of key sectors facing some pretty significant challenges right now.
Yeah, from the sea to the land, there are definite headwinds.
Let's start with the blue economy. We have reports from the third Blue Economy Climate Resilience Forum. The theme was promoting resilience across the blue economy.
Sounds important. Focusing on climate risks, vulnerabilities, rising sea levels, shorelines disappearing, all critical issues for Belize.
And this connects directly to a very visible, very tangible problem, sargassum.
Oh, definitely. Sargassum isn't just, ugly seaweed on the beach. It's a major economic and environmental threat, especially for a blue economy.
And the forecasts are bad this year.
Record levels expected across the Caribbean and the Gulf. Minister Andre Perez described the situation in San Pedro as the worst it has been in almost a decade.
Wow, how bad is it?
He mentioned it extending 40 to 50 feet out from the shoreline in places like Caye Caulker.
40 to 50 feet? That's staggering. How do you even begin to clear that?
That's the massive challenge. It requires constant, heavy effort.
And this brings us to those sargassum harvesters. Minister Perez defended them, called them very effective, working Monday to Friday.
Despite public criticism about whether they're really doing enough.
Right. He did admit more needed and said data on the costs would be released eventually.
It just highlights this really tough spot coastal nations are in with climate adaptation, doesn't it? You invest in expensive solutions, but the scale of the problem can sometimes dwarf the efforts, at least in the public eye.
A very complex, urgent issue. Okay, from the sea, let's go to the fields. We have a stark update on the sugar industry.
Yeah, another vital sector. And the news isn't good. Minister of Agriculture Jose Mai gave a pretty grim assessment.
He called it a very bad season.
Worse than that, he said it was worse than we had expected.
Oof, do we have numbers?
We do. The original production estimate for 2024 was 1.9 million tons of sugarcane. That got revised down significantly to 1.045 million tons.
That's a huge drop already.
But it gets worse. The actual amount delivered last year was 1.043 million. This year, based on field assessments, the revised estimate was 900,000 tons.
And the actual milling so far?
As of the report, only 859,625 tons milled. Minister Mai predicted they might end up with maybe 875,000 tons if the rains continue.
Wow. The precision of that data really drives home how vulnerable agriculture is to the weather there, a direct, immediate threat.
Absolutely critical sector facing major uncertainty.
Okay, let's move to tourism, another bedrock, and it seems to be facing its own kind of storm.
We heard from a tour operator, David Almendarez.
Right. He painted a bleak picture, called it one of the worst slow seasons in memory.
Said tour guides are having to wash cars, do construction work, because there are days with 0 cruise ships.
That's tough. And he points fingers, doesn't he?
He does. He directly blames authorities for, in his words, doubling the park fees to all archaeological sites.
Like from $5 to $10 per person.
Exactly. And he says it was done without consultation, making Belize, which he already considers expensive, even more so.
So that raises that classic dilemma, balancing revenue needs versus staying competitive for tourists.
It certainly does. Almendarez also made an interesting side comment.
What was that?
He suggested that Republican tourists, from Trump's party in the U.S., they travel the most and aren't really bothered by the U.S. economy right now.
An interesting observation on tourist demographics. Did the government respond to his concerns about the fee hikes?
The reports we saw don't show a direct, immediate government rebuttal to Almendarez's specific points on the fees. But, the general conversation around tourism always involves this tightrope walk between maximizing income and keeping visitor numbers up. His comments really reflect the industry feeling the pinch on the ground.
Understood. Okay, another industry facing big potential changes. The bus industry.
Yes. We heard from German Tillet, a bus owner. He's strongly opposing a government proposal.
The Consolidated National Bus Company idea. A public-private partnership, or PPP.
That's the one. He actually called the idea a very good initiative, but he said the way they're proposing to do it is not the right way. He thinks it needs proper study, especially because it would likely be a monopoly.
And it's personal for him too, right? His family's been in the business for generations.
Exactly. He said they're not willing to give that industry just like that. His view is the government should focus on fixing terminals, fixing roads, maybe helping with fuel costs or incentives.
Instead of bringing millions into an industry he says is still living.
Right. And he was very clear. If this plan goes ahead in January, as suggested, they will not accept it.
Wow. That really shows the deep concern from established businesses when these kinds of large-scale reforms are floated, especially when they affect generational livelihoods.
Absolutely. Major resistance brewing there.
Okay, so these are some pretty significant shifts and challenges across different sectors. And inevitably, this leads to broader discussions about the national economy, public services.
Like the ongoing pension reform debate.
Exactly, which is directly linked to the joint unions push JUNT, that is for an 8.5% salary adjustment. That adjustment seems contingent on the pension reform happening.
And the unions have very specific conditions and concerns. Nadia Kellis, the BNT president, laid them out.
What are the main sticking points?
Well, first, they won't back a contributory pension scheme without a full salary review because they argue some members are currently underpaid.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
They oppose the government's idea of new entrants contributing 5%. And they really disagree with cutting the replacement rate. That's the percentage of your final salary you get as pension.
The current rate is 67% for 35 years' work, right? Dropping for less time.
Yes. And the government apparently wants to lower that to 50%. The unions are not having that.
Any other issues?
The contribution split. They don't agree with a 50-50 split between employer and employee. They argue the employer should pay more.
And their overall argument is that past salary cuts push people into poverty, so any new system has to be better than the current constitutional protection.
That's their line in the sand. And significantly, there's no date set yet for the two sides to even meet again.
So, given how firm the unions sound and the scope of their demands, how likely is a compromise here, especially considering the government's own fiscal constraints?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The fact there's no meeting schedule really highlights how far apart they likely are. The unions are tying present fairness, the salary review, directly to future security, the pension terms.
Yeah.
That makes it a really complex social contract negotiation.
Yeah.
The government's obviously looking at long-term financial sustainability. So, yeah, finding common ground is going to take major concessions, probably from both sides. The union's demands, as stated, would have pretty big budget implications.
A tough negotiation ahead. Okay, maybe the biggest picture item we have relates to the government's fiscal incentives program.
The Kate Chapel Development Scrutiny.
That's the one. Receiving a massive $232 million in tax and duty exemptions. That number really caught my eye.
It's a huge figure.
Yeah.
And Minister of State for Finance, Chris Coy, he defended it, claimed these kinds of concessions are actually revenue neutral.
Revenue neutral, how does that work with such a large exemption?
Well, the mechanism he described is interesting. He said Beltrade, or the Ministry of Investment's policy unit, does what they call a revenue neutrality analysis for every single concession application.
Okay.
And a recommendation to approve it is only made if the analysis shows a net positive tax revenue to the government. So he asserts these concessions actually end up having a positive effect on government revenues overall.
So he claims revenue neutral or even positive based on this internal analysis by Beltrade. But thinking from the public's perspective, is there any kind of independent check on these analyses? Or is it all internal? How can people be sure revenue neutral really means a net benefit for the average citizen?
That is a really critical question and one that comes up a lot in these situations. The sources we looked at don't mention any external independent verification process for these Beltrade analyses.
So it relies on the ministry's own unit.
As described, yes.
Yeah.
The investment unit does the analysis, makes a recommendation to the finance minister. So while the government frames it as a calculated positive move for the economy,
There's room for public skepticism because there isn't that clear independent audit trail for the revenue neutrality claim.
exactly. It's that classic tension between government economic strategy and the public's desire for transparent accountability.
And Koyi ties this whole incentive strategy directly to broader economic performance, doesn't he?
He does. He points to foreign direct investment, FDI, being at its highest in history. He mentions the 2024 economic growth rate at 8.2% and unemployment and underemployment rates being at historic lows.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of Belize's economic approach?
Well, it presents the government's case pretty clearly. These large incentives, even though they look like huge giveaways up front, are, according to the Ministry of Finance, directly linked to major economic growth, job creation, and overall positive revenue. They argue it's what builds the confidence needed for big investments.
A compelling argument if you accept the premise and the internal analysis.
Indeed.
Okay, finally, let's shift to something a bit lighter but still really informative about Belizean life in a successful industry: chicken.
Ah, yes, the love for chicken.
Apparently, it unites almost everyone. The stats are pretty amazing. Belizeans consume around 110 pounds of chicken per person per year.
110 pounds. That's among the highest in the entire Western Hemisphere.
Incredible. And quality poultry products. QPP, they sell about 20 million pounds of chicken annually. That's something like 6.5 million birds.
Wow. And QPP is celebrating a big milestone, right? 50 years in 2025.
They're having motorcades across the country. There's one planned for Belize City this Saturday, June 21st.
That's quite the celebration. But what's really striking about QPP, based on what their manager Andre Salgado said, is how they've adapted over those 50 years.
More than just selling raw chicken.
Way more. They've evolved significantly. They invested in further processing, making things like chicken ham slices, breakfast sausages. They've got that Chicken Express line, pre-seasoned, pre-cleaned products for convenience.
Smart. Adapting to how people cook and eat now.
Exactly. And they just invested over $1 million in a new packaging machine. Apparently it helps prevent leakage, extends shelf life, stops the chicken sticking together.
Attention to detail.
And they're not stopping. They're launching their own hot dog sausage soon, and even an Argentinian chorizo. It really shows how, even in a staple industry like chicken, constant innovation and responding to consumer demand is key to staying on top.
And prices.
Mostly stable, apparently. The last big increase was 2 or 3 years ago. The only thing that fluctuates seems to be neck and back prices.
Good to know. And they planned ahead to avoid egg shortages too.
Strategic planning seems to be a hallmark.
They're also doing a lot for customer appreciation, branch fairs with discounts like 50 cents off per pound on legs, special prices on neck and back.
Spin wheels for prizes if you spend $25.
And a new loyalty card program. It really is a good example of a company focused on its customers and its long-term strategy in a core industry.
Definitely a success story worth noting.
Okay, just one quick final note before we wrap up. This concerns the Belize Diaspora Summit happening next month in Florida.
Ah, yes, there was a bit of controversy.
Yeah, reports surfaced suggesting the consulate of Belize in Florida wouldn't be participating because of ongoing immigration issues.
That sounds odd.
Minister of Foreign Affairs Francis Fonseca said he was not aware of that at all. He made it clear they need to participate.
As you expect.
Right. He emphasized that embassies and consulates exist to support the diaspora, and the immigration department will be there too, offering services like passport renewals and nationality applications.
So a swift clarification. It just goes to show how important those global connections are and how quickly small administrative hiccups, real or perceived, can cause concern among citizens living abroad.
Good point. Wow, okay. That was quite the deep dive into the latest from Belize.
It really was.
From, those deeply personal tragedies right through to the complexities of government finance, climate change challenges, and even the successes of the chicken industry.
It gives you a real snapshot of a nation grappling with a lot of complex issues all at once.
A nation in motion.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is seeing how seemingly separate things like that legal tweak for political parties or the concerns of a bus owner are all interconnected threads in the bigger story of Belize's development.
Yeah.
It really hammers home that every policy choice, every environmental shift, every business adaptation, it all has real-world consequences for the people living there.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? You see all these different pressures, the immediate shock of an accident, the long-term planning for a blue economy. How do all these things together shape where Belize is heading?
And that leads to an important question for you, the listener, to maybe ponder. As you reflect on everything we've discussed today, based on these reports, what single issue do you think is the most critical for Belize's future right now? And why?
That's a great question to chew on. We hope this deep dive has given you that shortcut to being well-informed, maybe sparked a few aha moments.
I hope so.
Until next time, keep exploring.